All right, next we're going to read a story about the first Thanksgiving, and we're going to put the story of Thanksgiving in order, and you'll need scissors and a glue also. All right, so you'll need your turkey page with a 1, 2, 3, 4, scissors, and a glue. But first, we'll read our story. And coming up, not this week, but next week, it's Thanksgiving. So this is called The First Thanksgiving. The First Thanksgiving. It's a little long, but it's important that we learn about what happened. On September 6th, in the year 1620, a small wooden ship called the Mayflower sailed on its way to America. It had left the country of England with 102 people. These people came to be known as the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims had left England because King James did not want them to practice their own religion. So they were in search of a new home. So they're leaving because the king, he told them they couldn't pray the way they wanted to. He told them they couldn't believe in God the way they wanted to. So they said, we're going to move. We want to pray the way we want to pray. We want to believe in God. Sometimes the sea was calm and gentle. The weather was warm and the birds flew overhead. The fish leaped above and dipped down below the clear blue water. The children in the tiny ship laughed and played hand games. So the name of the ship is called the Mayflower. At other times, the sea was rough and stormy. The sky grew gray. Large raindrops fell from the heavy clouds, plopping into the sea and into the Mayflower. Tall waves rocked the ship, and the children were afraid. So sometimes it was stormy, and it was a little bit scary. With more gray skies than blue, the Mayflower sailed along the ocean for 2 months. That's like 60 days. Finally, after the long journey, the weary pilgrims sighted land. Land ahead! Someone shouted. As the Mayflower got closer and closer, there was nothing but tall trees as far as the eye could see. We have found the new world, someone said. The pilgrims were very happy. Slowly, the ship made its way inland. This was December 21st, 1620. The pilgrims docked the ship and they came ashore. They were on the land of the Wampanoag Nation. This was the village of Patuxet. We will call this land New England, said William Bradford, the Pilgrims' leader. Today, this place is called Plymouth, Massachusetts. So, the Pilgrims began to explore the new land. They saw no people. The Patuxet Wampanoag and thousands of other native people had died from a terrible sickness that came with European fishermen in 1616. So Native Americans were living here. In no time, the Pilgrims began to get settled. Winter was fast approaching. They knew they needed sturdy shelter and a place to store their food. While the women took care of the children, the men began to build. They built one big house that winter, and they called it the Common House. So they didn't have a lot of time because it was already cold, so they only built one house, and they all stayed in there together. The winter was bitter cold and often snowy. The Pilgrims did not have much food left from their trip. Most of the time they were hungry. They tried to stay healthy and cheerful, but it was difficult, and many of them became very sick. The Common House became a hospital for the sick, but the house did not provide enough heat and protect them from the cold and the fierce winds and the icy storms. Many of them died, and only 50 pilgrims were left as the winter dragged on. Then one day, the Pilgrims realized that the long, hard winter had ended. They heard the birds chirping. The leaves had sprouted on the trees, and spring had arrived. Also warmer temperatures and weather. One afternoon, a native man appeared outside. The Pilgrims were surprised when he said, "Welcome, Englishmen." He had learned English from English merchants who had come on ships with goods to trade. His name was Samoset. Later, Samoset brought his friend Squanto to meet the Pilgrims. Squanto knew English too. He had been kidnapped and brought to England in 1614. 5 years later, he had made it back home. Squanto taught the Pilgrims how to plant corn. He showed them how to put fish in the earth 2 weeks before planting, and he explained that the fish would fertilize the earth and help it grow good corn. The Pilgrims were grateful, and they began to plant corn as they were taught by Squanto. They planted seeds for beans, squash, and pumpkins too. The Pilgrims learned how to fish, dig for clams, and catch eels. After a while, Squanto visited and brought along Chief Massasoit of the Pokanoket Wampanoag tribe. The chief had 60 of his men with them. They talked to the Pilgrims about why the Pilgrims had come to this land. William Bradford and Chief Massasoit made a treaty. They promised to band together against people who wanted to hurt either group. Soon it was the time for the Pilgrims to prepare for the coming winter. Squanto showed them how to find their way through the woods and how to hunt animals for meat. The Pilgrims built more houses. They worked hard all summer. At the end of the summer, they had built 7 small homes. So they had like a little community. Green leaves turned red, golden, and orange with autumn's arrival, and the Pilgrims' harvest was plentiful. There were tall stalks of corn, large orange pumpkins, squash, and beans. The Pilgrims were very thankful for their food. Because they were so happy, they decided they should have a big feast and give thanks for all their blessings. That fall, in October of 1621, they had a harvest feast. For the feast, the men hunted wild turkeys that the women cooked. 90 Native Americans, including Chief Massasoit, joined the Pilgrims at the feast. The guests brought deer that was cooked over a blazing fire. So the Native Americans and the Pilgrims, they had a big feast, which is like a meal, and they shared it together. The Native Americans brought food. The Pilgrims brought food. Huge servings of meat were placed on long tables that stood side by side. There were meat pies, wheat breads, and corn puddings. There were berries, grapes, dried plums, and nuts. For 3 days the celebration lasted. There was eating, dancing, and playing games. This feast was later called the First Thanksgiving by Abraham Lincoln. He proclaimed the 4th Thursday of November as the official Thanksgiving Day, and that's coming up next week. So, we're going to work on this page now. So the first thing I do is always the same. Pick up my pen and I write my name. Do you remember my new name? Mrs. Barrios. And then we're going to just do a little coloring first. So I'm going to color some corn. You see the corn stalks over here? Whoa. And then I'm going to color in the corn kind of yellow, right? Does anyone like corn? I love corn. I love corn on the cob. I love corn in a bowl. I love street corn. I love corn bread. I love corn casserole. Mrs. Barrios loves corn. So if you eat corn on Thanksgiving, I want you to think about me. All right. We can color our turkey a little bit. We're going to learn about turkeys this week. This thing hanging down from the turkey is called a wattle. A wattle. It's red. I'm going to use some crayons too. And color some turkey feathers. Let's see. You can make your turkey as colorful as you'd like. Maybe a rainbow turkey if you want. That's your choice. Oh my goodness. feathers are coming down kind of on the sides too. He's like holding the numbers. Do you see that? Maybe we'll do a little bluebird. And let's see. Let's do some red and some yellow and some kind of pinkish. And some orange. All right, so first things first, press pause if you need to finish coloring, okay? So I'm gonna start my cutting. So we're gonna kind of turn it and we're gonna cut on the dotted line and we're gonna cut this whole entire piece off, okay? So you should have 2 separate pieces. Then we're gonna cut these pieces apart. And you're gonna have 4 pieces. You're gonna have a girl planting corn, a winter house, the boat called the Mayflower, and a feast. So we're gonna be looking at our pictures. What has to happen first? So first, the Pilgrims came on a ship called the Mayflower from England, right? So there they are on the Mayflower. The King of England told them they couldn't pray how they wanted to, so they decided to leave. When they got to the land, which they called New England, which is also called Plymouth, Massachusetts today, they had to build shelter. Remember, it was so cold, they only had time to build one house. And it was called the Common House. And they all lived together that first winter. After that, when it started to warm up, the Native Americans came. Squanto taught the Pilgrims how to grow corn, right? They dug a hole. They put a fish, a dead fish, into the soil, and that kind of gave the soil good nutrients and like vitamins and made their corn seed grow better. And then after they had lots of food they planted, they had a big feast. And that's why we celebrate Thanksgiving today, to remember the feast or the big meal between the Native Americans and the Pilgrims. Press pause if you need to finish.